Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we're joined by Nicole Kligerman and Adriana George of the Domestic Workers Alliance, and Kimmy Cook of the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia will join us to discuss the city budget. At the end of the show, Denise Clay-Murray will report live from Chicago, from the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. You may have heard there was an interesting story that just came out of that convention involving former President Donald Trump. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the show. But to get us started, here is our interview with Kimmy Cook from the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia. All right, Kimmy Cook, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia?
Yes, the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia, we're a broad multi-issue coalition. We have over 24 organizations, community groups here in Philadelphia. And together we work towards building a city that prioritizes the needs of all people and communities. Really where everybody can thrive, feel safe. And we really are working towards that dream of having a city that is, supportive of everybody, working Philadelphians, low-income folks, especially Black, brown, immigrant, refugee, poor, working class residents.
How do you do that? Through events and advocacy?
Yeah, we do a lot of advocacy. We do host events. We really focus on those who hold power in government. So for us, we're looking at our local government, Mayor Parker, and City Council, or whoever is the mayor at the time for us. So in order for our vision of Philadelphia to be real, our elected leaders must do what's necessary to invest in services and public institutions that we all need, while divesting from the broken systems that harm our communities. So we really focus on advocacy at the local elected level. We do that we have policy platforms that we put out that we get together by surveying all of our members and our organizations. It's over 1,000 Philadelphia residents. And we take that information and build a platform. And from that platform, we use that to hold our elected officials accountable to make sure that they are truly serving us.
And on that note, what you're discussing here is the People's Platform. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And not just how it comes together, but what are those planks in that platform that people should really know about?
Yeah, so the People's Platform came together through the idea of, well, if we're going to be pushing candidates during elections and pushing our elected officials to be held accountable, we really need to know what we are rooting for and what we're pushing for. So the Alliance was formed in 2018. And in 2019, we had our first People's Platform for that city council election. Since then, we've once again did that process last year for the election, the council election and mayoral election that happened last year in 2023. And so through that, we have created this very robust platform. We believe we're ready to fight for an economy for all, justice for all, land and housing for all, education for all. These are really broad, robust topics, but within each one, we have certain organizations that their members are really the stakeholders of, and that's their main issue. And through the Alliance, we can coalesce around these different large platform visions and campaign and work towards winning these big, broad goals.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the recently passed city budget. What should Philadelphians know about this?
Yeah, the recently passed budget was mixed in our view. It had wins and it had a lot of big losses. We're really excited about a couple things that passed in this budget. The budget received a $500 million increase for the Community College of Philadelphia, which is something our partners really advocated for, considering so many native Philadelphia residents go to CCP. It's really the school of Philadelphia, and many graduates from CCP end up staying and working and living in the city. So we're really excited to see the funding increased for Community College of Philadelphia. We're also really excited to see that the Built to Last program, which is a home repairs program through the Philadelphia Energy Authority, received its funding of $5 million, which is what we and our partners were advocating for. So that program is really important because it specifically helps low-income Philadelphia homeowners with updating their homes to be safer, to be more energy efficient, and to be more affordable, so that those families can really stay in their homes long term. So really excited to see funding for that. And then another really big win we're excited about is $19 million that is going towards eviction diversion financial assistance. So that's a really big deal too. And all of these investments, we really saw a focus on housing, and they're really going to address the needs of working Philadelphians, especially at a time where housing costs continue to skyrocket. These budget wins offer new protections to keep people in their homes and protect low-income residents. So that's what's good about the budget. We're excited for that. We're hoping to continue to build on some of those wins, in the coming years. But we also had a lot of things in the budget that we saw as pretty harmful for working Philadelphians, that we specifically campaigned for. Top of line is that we had asked for a $2.6 million increase for the Office of Worker Protections, which we did not receive any increase for. In fact, there was a slight cut to the Department of Labor budget, which is where that Office of Worker Protections sits in. And that office, go ahead.
Not to cut you off, but it's that the fact that you brought that up is really interesting. We did an interview yesterday with the Domestic Workers Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Brought the same thing and said, I think, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, but the number is one representative for every 200,000 Philadelphians when it comes to worker complaints, and it's astounding.
Yeah.
So to lose something like that, especially for people who are marginalized, it's very hard for them to find somebody to help them. That is very concerning and very troubling.
Yeah, definitely. That is the correct number. I believe it's 195,000 or 197,000. And it can take months for claims to process. And yeah, like you said, these are some of the most vulnerable folks. A lot of them, English is not their first language. They're immigrants. They're mostly women, women of color. And they also make our city run. They're domestic workers, they're nannies, cleaners.
Can't do it without them.
Can't do anything without them. And so to see that basic protections for workers, especially for non-unionized workers, is not a priority of council or this administration, is alarming, because that is so important to make sure that the most vulnerable Philadelphians have basic protections. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you optimistic that maybe in the mid-year transfer ordinance, which will probably come up in October, that maybe some of this could be worked out?
I think so. There's a lot of momentum around that right now. Yeah, especially National Domestic Workers Alliance and also Philly Black Worker Project folks. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they are also advocating for funding for OWP, the Office of Worker Protections. And I do think there is an opportunity there to mobilize and really push for some of the funding to get transferred. I know that there are conversations happening around that. I don't know how that'll play out, but I do think, there's definitely an opportunity to hopefully fix this wrong in the fall.
So one of the components of the budget is the long-term 5-year plan. One of the things that concerns us greatly is the fact that we're going to see a dwindling fund balance when we get to the end of that plan. About $14 million was the last number. When you look at something like that, do you look at that and say, oh, that's a big concern, we have to really keep an eye on it? Or do you look at it more as a work in progress, or maybe that doesn't have to be the case? How do you look at that, and how concerned are you about that?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, and I kind of fluctuate between how panic mode I get in. Obviously, it's not a great outlook, and I'm surprised that everybody seems okay with it. But at the same time, I feel like we're always being told, oh no, we're going to run out of money. We're going to have an austerity budget. And while we did get a huge bump from the federal COVID relief funds, before that, we kind of were in a similar place of oh no, there's going to be a fiscal cliff. And how we see it is, yeah, of course we have to be smart with our money, but being smart with our money looks like allocating funds to our essential public services that support, working Philadelphians the most, while getting funds from, say, taxing the rich, perhaps a wealth tax.
Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, bringing that bill back, perhaps making that a law. So the money is there. It really depends on how it's distributed, and we obviously would like to see that money distributed into the hands of more Philadelphians rather than corporations, the ultra wealthy, and harmful, systems such as the police and prisons department, which has been bloated for years and years. So to me, it's less of the money's not there and more of the money exists. How do we get it into the right hands?
Right. I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, thank you for giving us some of your time today. I really appreciate it. In terms of what you all do regarding the budget. Now, one of the things that when we talked to the Domestic Workers Alliance, we were talking about such things as minimum wages and the fact that the minimum wage, particularly here in Pennsylvania, has really, been crappy for a while now. When you look at budgets, I know you look at the city budget, but do you also look at the state budget, and what kind of advocacy are you all doing there?
So the Alliance really focuses as a whole on city budget and city government. We do have organizations within the Alliance that do city and state level work. So there is some overlap, and obviously they relate to each other and affect each other, but our focus really is at the city level. Yeah, the minimum wage is way too low. It has been for a long, long time. Even the demand for $15 an hour now seems too low. So that's not any of our organization's top issue campaign, but we do support, a higher minimum wage. At the same time, that doesn't really feel like that should stop us from still, pushing our current campaigns. Like I know Mayor Parker has said, like, I support a higher minimum wage, and that's preventing me from doing some of the things in the budget I'd want to do. But I think that they're not exclusionary. We can still work for fully funding the services we need and making sure that those offices and departments are robust, and at the same time, folks that are advocating and doing that hard on the ground work to really make sure that the minimum wage can get raised at the state level, is happening in a different realm from us.
Now, one of the things that folks, particularly in the business community, got kind of annoyed with is the fact that there weren't any tax cuts in the budget. As someone who looks at ways that the budget can be better for people, were you surprised there were no tax cuts? And I mean, because normally when I hear when I hear the phrase tax cut, I think, or I see, my mind goes to a place where I'm looking at someone who's already making a ton of money, getting more money at the expense of human beings that could really use the money. But, were you surprised there were no tax cuts in this budget? And what do tax cuts actually do in terms of a city budget? Because we talk about it nationally, but we never talk about it, on a local level.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right in that tax cuts for me as well mean that's really equal tax breaks to corporations, to the wealthy, Comcast, Aramark, big giants in Philadelphia that are based in Philadelphia. I was a little surprised just because, the norm has been for each mayor every year for a long time now to propose incremental tax cuts, especially to the BERT tax, the business income and receipts tax, and the wage tax. So yeah, that was a little surprising. And then it quickly kind of came to light on why that decision was made, that Mayor Parker and Council President Johnson are reinstating this tax reform commission. And the idea is that the tax reform commission is going to come together and really do research and come up with a new tax policy for Philadelphia. in reality, this tax reform commission is filled with Chamber of Commerce folks, real estate folks, big business allies. And so we already know what they're going to recommend, and it will be tax cuts, surprise, especially business tax cuts. So what does that really mean for the budget? Well, tax cuts equal service cuts. That means that's cuts to our city revenue, specifically if cut to the business tax, the BERT tax does go through, and it has in the past incrementally, that's directly taking money out of our operating budget revenue. The BERT tax currently makes up about 15% of our general fund. So imagine how much, money that goes towards our parks, our recreation centers, our libraries, our health department, our streets. So really cutting those taxes is really just a break for the wealthy while continuing to divest from our essential public services that do serve our working Philadelphians, our low-income families the most.
Now, do you also look at the school district budget or just the city budget?
We do, but not as closely. And I'll say I'm not as informed on how that kind of plays into everything. So we do, look at the budget holistically, but we mostly focus on the operating budget, and sometimes the capital budget as well.
Now, when you look at the operating budget and the capital budget, because, occasionally when we look at the budget, we ask ourselves the same questions. What does this budget contain that really doesn't need to be here? You are the budget director. Let's just say you're the budget director for the city of Philadelphia, and you are looking at the budget. You can create a budget. What would you take out so that that money can be better utilized for the people who need it?
I think a really glaring, harmful addition to the budget this year is the $100 million that will be going towards. I'm honestly not sure what the latest iteration that Mayor Parker is calling it, but the forced treatment center, the triage center. Now, to be clear, this money's a bond. It's we're borrowing it, so it's not necessarily something we're taking out of the budget, but obviously it's a huge investment that we will owe back. Based on very little details given about the operation of these facilities, they appear to criminalize those facing addiction, criminalize homelessness. It's getting built next to the jails on State Road. So we're feeling very bad about that being passed. And it's such a large amount of money, especially compared to some of our demands, such as, put $100 million next to $2.6 million for the Office of Worker Protections. That will help hundreds of thousands of, vulnerable working Philadelphians. Those are the kinds of things that we should be prioritizing rather than $100 million, basically a blank check for what might end up being some sort of pseudo jail. We're not really sure. Forced treatment center.
At the very least, it would get rid of the backlog in terms of worker protection complaints.
At the very least. I mean, at the most, which is what we really dream, is that, every worker feels like they can go straight to OWP with their, complaint of whatever exploitation their employer has done, and have it resolved in a timely manner, and have enough employees in that office to really be able to take on those cases and support those workers.
Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I'm going to give you back to my co-host, Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Kimmy, where can people learn more about the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia?
Yeah, so you can check out our website. That's where we have our people's platform listed, which is at adjustphiladelphia.org. You can also check us out on Instagram, which does get updated more often, and if we have calls to action or maybe like analysis or statements on certain things like the budget passing, you can check us out at Adjust Philly. And then we're also on Twitter. Sometimes we'll live tweet during hearings in City Hall or whatnot, and that's also at Adjust Philly.
And I recommend, if you're a working class person in Philadelphia, take a look at this, because this is the kind of stuff people should be asking for from their local government. That's what this is. So Kimmy, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we hope to have you on again real soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'd like to thank Kimmy Cook for joining us. Of the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia, I really recommend you check out their website. And Kimmy will be back with us soon to talk more about what's going on in Philadelphia. Next, we have an interview with Nicole Kligerman and Adriana George of the Domestic Workers Alliance. And this is kind of in the same venue a little bit, right? Talking about workers' rights for people who sometimes are hard to organize because, if you're a caregiver, you do childcare, something like that, you're usually just one person. And so it's harder to find those people and get them organized. So you're going to hear a little bit about what that's like and some of the things that they're trying to work on to make sure that caregivers and people who work in this space are given the proper rights that they deserve. So here's our interview with the Domestic Workers Alliance. All right. We would like to thank Adriana George and Nicole Kligerman for joining us here on the program to tell us about the Domestic Workers Alliance. So tell us exactly what that is and how it works.
Great. I think I can get started and then I'll have Adriana jump into the issues that domestic workers are facing. So the National Domestic Workers Alliance is the national home for the 2.5 million domestic workers in this country. So that's nannies, house cleaners, caregivers. And here at the Pennsylvania chapter of NDWA, we are organizing domestic workers primarily right now in the Philadelphia area. All of our members work in private homes doing the critical work of cleaning, caring for elders and disabled people, caring for children, really doing the work that makes all other work possible. All of our members are Black and Latinx women for the most part, who really form the backbone of our society and economy. And really what we're fighting for is justice and dignity in the workplace for domestic workers because of the legacy of enslavement in this country and the ways that racism and sexism are enshrined in law. Domestic workers have been excluded from all levels of labor rights protections at the local, state, and federal level because, I think history is important. And in the 1930s, when those New Deal era basic labor laws were passed, the deal with the devil of the white Southern congressmen to pass those laws was to exclude agricultural and domestic workers from those laws because that was work performed by enslaved people. So we're still fighting against that legacy. And luckily we won. The Philadelphia Domestic Worker Bill of Rights went into effect in 2020, is the strongest law of its kind in the country in order to extend labor protections to Philadelphia's domestic workers for the first time in our history. And now we're doing a lot more work to make sure that those rights are real. And maybe I'll have Adriana explain a little bit more about what we've been up to since we won this landmark legislation in 2020.
Hi, my name is Adriana. I am the lead organizer for the We Dream in Black chapter within the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And so I am also a former domestic worker. And so what we are experiencing or what we are seeing a lot of during the time that we would conduct outreach within the Rittenhouse area of Philadelphia is that workers, even though that we passed this beautiful law, the Bill of Rights, is that workers' rights are still being violated within the workplace. Some of those are really heavy on the retaliation side, when workers take a stance to ask for whether it's a contract or to, when employers ask them to do tasks that is outside of their contract, they're then being retaliated against. They're facing defamation of character because you would see where the employers take to social media to defamate the character by saying they're not good, employees, don't hire this person, et cetera, et cetera. And so that has been really detrimental and on the workers' finances. And so our wage theft as well is a really big one where, workers are not being compensated fairly for the hours that they work. They're also struggling with having to ask for their pay after a field work, where they would have gone through 45 hours, they still have to then send their employers a message to say, hey, you didn't pay me. But a lot of it is heavily on, they're not even being compensated for the extra 5 hours of that 45 hours week. So those are a few of the issues that workers are facing, along with discrimination. And so right now, what we are working on is the anti-retaliation campaign that would further support the Bill of Rights. And I know Nicole would share best on, we'll do a good overview on where we are right now with the campaign. So I'll pass it over to you.
I can speak a little bit more about so thank you, Adriana. So now, what we always see is when workers step up and fight back, we also see pushback from the employers. So as domestic workers are saying, we have these new rights now. We've worked invisibly, we've worked in the shadows, and now we want the law that we fought so hard for to be enforced. We see employers increasingly retaliating against them, and a government the city government that's structurally underfunded to be able to follow up on those complaints in a timely manner. So we are working with Councilmember Kendra Brooks on new legislation that we'll be introducing hopefully in September. We have a lot of support from council right now to pass new mechanisms to protect all workers, not just domestic workers, from retaliation, to ensure that there's like a swift and timely support from city government, from the Philadelphia Department of Labor, more supports for workers, and that there's more accountability for the employers that are violating those laws. And that's not just for domestic workers, it's for all 750,000 Philadelphians who rely on the city's Department of Labor. Last week, we just had a case of someone who was cleaning, not a domestic worker, but she was a cleaner in a store in South Philly, who her employer purposefully slammed her arm in the door, and then told her that they would call immigration on her if she spoke up. So these are the kinds of issues that we're dealing with, and because there's only one full-time staffer in the city for every 200,000 Philadelphians, cases take 6 months to even open. So as you can imagine, that has a real chilling effect, not just on that person, but on her entire community that now knows that if you're physically abused at work and you want to stand up for yourself, you could be deported, and the city is 6 months is basically never in this timescape. And we're talking about people who are paid under the table, might not have immigration status, might not speak English, have families to feed that rely on them. And I'll also mention that, domestic workers make an average of about $10,000 in Philadelphia. So we're really working with the most marginalized people. And that's why we need to see the city invest the most in our communities. Something additional is because of that structure, a piece of the problem is, Philadelphia loves to pass an unfunded mandate. So we pass the best law in the country, but it maintains fully one investigator for every 200,000 people is not an appropriate ratio to bring, justice delayed is justice denied, in order to bring swift justice to people who are being extremely abused, and whose rights are being violated across the board. So we fought really hard for a fully funded Office of Worker Protections under the fiscal year 25 city budget, and unfortunately, Mayor Parker chose to cut that budget by an additional $500,000 instead of investing the additional $2.6 million we wanted. So, and that's on city council as well. Obviously, that's a bicameral. It's both council and mayor that passed the budget. So we are fighting really hard to change that situation for domestic workers and for all working people in Philadelphia.
How many complaints such as the one you had mentioned do you see, let's say, in a month?
It's a good question. We have, I think, several dozen complaints right now. And Adriana can speak more to that. And that's just to us, right? That's
So
not
that's my point, right? Several dozen that you know about.
exactly.
Somebody actually came and reported,
Right.
and because they might be afraid to do so,
Mhm.
right? Or they know that, from the city's point of view, they're not going to get any relief because what you just explained. So it does make sense to me that people would say, well, what am I going to do?
Mhm.
Right. And that's kind of the system we've set up here. How do you fight that? How do you keep things moving in the right direction?
How do we do it, Adriana?
We speak hope into people because and what because I'm currently working with one person right now on a case, and she is undocumented, and she has her own fear of being deported and stuff like that. So I try to I try to give people hope and explain that, the immigration system is different from your labor rights. It's two different entity, and regardless of whether you are documented or not, this is the law, and you have rights, right? You contribute because even though workers are undocumented, they do have a ITN, right, which is a tax ID number. They contribute to the taxes, so you are entitled to be treated fairly. You should be treated fairly and compensated for your hours that you work.
And, we know that change in this country only comes when hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people unify and fight back. We know that employers are not going to just do the right thing for them. I mean, there are some good employers out there, but they're not going to just do the right thing without a demand. So that's why we are, Adriana and our other organizers and member leaders are out in the parks, in the libraries, in the consulates, in the health centers every day, meeting new workers, bringing them into our movement. And we go to City Hall and go to employers and make our demands known collectively. Because all domestic workers kind of by definition are working in different individual homes. It's quite different from, I'm a former union organizer and deep believer in unions. And I worked for the nurses union previously. You can go to a cafeteria and you can talk to all the nurses at once. You can go to the ER and you have 10 nurses, all of whom have their hands on literally the same body trying to save that life. In this circumstance, you have 16,000 domestic workers in Philly working in hundreds of thousands of homes. So creating a sense of collectivity and of unity and the solidarity that's required to win is our bread and butter is really challenging, but we also saw domestic workers come together and win the best law in the country. So we're certain that our next victory is imminent, and it's a challenge.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the people you're working with are largely like one person shops, right? It's one person, and that's how we met actually at the park.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important, and I think you're absolutely right. It's a lot harder to get one person, than if you have a collective room of people who you can talk to. Okay. I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, thank you both for joining us. You said when you introduced yourselves that you represent domestic workers, people like nannies and caregivers. Do you also represent like CNAs, people who do like in-home care for people who are seniors or people who have a chronic disease or something?
Yes, we do. Yes. So CNA, what we call them, home care workers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we represent nannies, CNA, which falls under the home care bracket, and house cleaners. Also, newborn care specialists. It goes kind of sort of hand in hand with what a nanny does. It's just that they're more immediate with the mom after she gives birth, coming out of the hospital.
Okay. Now, the reason I asked that question is if you watch afternoon television at all, especially if you're like a fan of judge shows like I watch on occasion, you see all of these advertisements for all of these home care companies like Exceptional Hearts and Visiting Angels and all these other companies. And they talk about compensation for these workers who do a very hard job, because I put myself through college doing it, so I know. But with the kind of pay that traditionally you get for these jobs, it doesn't balance out. Are you all doing anything specific regarding that? Or is that just part of your overall work to make sure that these folks who are in some cases having to pick people up by themselves and stuff, that they're getting the pay and benefits that they need to be able to live?
That's a great question with a lightly complicated answer. Home care is one of the fastest growing labor forces in the country. Home care workers do incredibly important work of caring for our elders and an increasingly aging population, as well as people living with disabilities. So that work is so important to help people live and in many cases die with dignity. It's like, what could be more precious and important than supporting family members and ourselves in that work? So thank you for your work as a domestic worker as well. The agencies that you'd see, get paid to take care of mom, or, Philly Care Best 1, 2, 3 on the side of a bus. Those are very frequently funded by Medicare. So those are publicly funded dollar agencies. Primarily who we work with is folks who do the same work, primarily, but not exclusively, who do the same work, but for private pay, which means that they actually have fewer labor protections, because when folks are working for these home care agencies are bottom feeder, incredibly exploitive companies. Let's start with that. They are getting compensation that they're getting paid for by the state. And the consumer, the client, is paying a lot of money to these companies, and that money is going primarily to the company as opposed to the worker. So that is someone sitting in an office, not doing the incredibly difficult heavy lifting, et cetera, like work, the actual work. And the worker is walking away with like $9 an hour, $13 an hour. And because that they are publicly funded, they do have some more labor protections than most of our members who are working for private pay, not publicly funded, which kind of kicks them out of that labor protection system. And the only law that they have to protect them really is our Philadelphia Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. So at the national level, we're fighting really hard to have an increased percentage of the funding, and our union partners at SEIU are working with us at the state level in Harrisburg, such that the funding that comes from the state, more of it should go to the worker and less of it should go to the guy in the office that's making money off of your work. So we're absolutely kind of collectively working on that and supporting that fight. And unfortunately, if you are a private pay domestic worker, you are excluded from the Pennsylvania Minimum Wage Act, which means that you could pay a house cleaner a penny an hour, and that would be legal in Pennsylvania if she's private pay. And because wages are set at the state level and not at the city level, we are unfortunately subject to lawmakers in Harrisburg around that exclusion from the Pennsylvania Minimum Wage Act, which is the reason that if I think Philadelphia politicians would pass a $15 minimum wage, or obviously it should be at like $22 minimum wage at this point. And they can't do that for anybody because of preemption, because of the relationship between how Harrisburg governs Philadelphia. But domestic workers are even excluded from that PA Minimum Wage Act. So as you start to dig, it gets worse and worse. And that's why we are fighting harder and harder.
Now, Philadelphia has a domestic bill of rights, domestic workers bill of rights. Does the state have a domestic workers bill of rights? And where does the process to getting that done stand?
No, ma'am, it does not. We are right now really focused on our anti-retaliation legislation because we really want to demonstrate proof of concept that it works here in Philadelphia, that it raised the wages, that it made work safer for everybody. And then we can be ready to go statewide. We're a pretty small shop. You're looking at half of our staff right now. But nationally, we are working on a federal domestic worker bill of rights in order to really unify the 2.5 million domestic workers all across the country in places that don't have kind of local chapters like us, in places like Mississippi or Iowa or wherever it might be, so that we can really be in solidarity with all workers. I don't know if you want to add anything else. You can do it next
Now, I did have a question specific. I speak for a living. I just don't always do it well. Specifically for you, Adriana, as a domestic worker here in Philadelphia, as someone who is navigating that system, what has your experience been like? Has it been universally bad? Has it been good? Has it been some combination of the two? And if so, how have you managed to navigate it?
So there has been a combination. And to be honest, it has been, what would I say, more on the good side than on the bad side. So I joined the org because I'm from the Caribbean. Coming here, this has been an eye-opener for me. And so the first 2 jobs were horrible. I would have had to quit those 2 jobs. And I also come from the background where I needed to have like a strong personality, stand up for myself kind of job, because I was an electrician home in my country working with all men. So I've always been a person that would, say what it is that I needed to say. So those 2 jobs has been horrible. I quit, and then I moved here to Philadelphia about 8 years ago. I've had 3 jobs during that time, and the first one as well. It has not been a good experience either. The 2 last, however, has been good, and I've been able to navigate, better, knowing about the organization and knowing that I have a Bill of Rights, that I'm not just, okay, I know that this is wrong morally. It is also the law. And regardless of the time whether I was documented or not, because I wasn't at the time, I too have a voice, right? Because I'm one of those people who had a tax ID as well, was contributed to paying my taxes. And so I've always been someone who would speak up for what I believe and what I know is right. And so NDWA too has given me that safe haven and feeling comfortable knowing that if I should stand up for my rights and I've been retaliated against, that I can call, which I've done, and get the necessary information, get aid with negotiating my contract. They have helped me along the way. I'm better now, even with helping others to do the same thing. But yeah, so that is what I would say, is that I did not fully join because of only just me. I joined because there are a lot of members that are suffering in silence, because we know that this working in a person's home is very isolated, and sometimes you often think that it's just you that is dealing with this thing. You think sometimes too, especially coming from the islands, is that maybe this is how it's supposed to be. Maybe this is what everybody experiences until you come together. So it's not until I started doing outreach, I started being in community with workers like myself, I got to find out, the depths of what has been going on secretly in people's home and in the lives of nannies, of how they have been treated. So, and I, spoke to Nicole about those situations. And this is what brought us to where we are with the campaign. Well, part of the reason why we are fighting, because people have been suffering in silence. And some of those people, not even though they have their status, because a lot of them do have their immigration status now, but they're still, afraid of the retaliation because we have the Bill of Rights, but they're still being retaliated against. So this is why we need to enforce, and bring about consequences along with the anti-retaliation. Because if you just pass it without having any real, strong consequences behind it, then what does that mean for workers and for us that is trying to bring about the change?
So my last question, at some point, we are all going to need some form of care. I mean, you have city workers that have just been brought back to work, and in many cases, they're going to need childcare. They're going to need elder care. At some point, everybody is going to need some form of domestic work. You have places like, and I can't remember the name of the place right now, but it's like $19 to clean your whole house and stuff like that. What could people who need your services do to be better employers? How could they be better employers?
I love that question. Really, to educate yourself, we need good employers to lead the way. So many people want to say, oh, Adriana, she's just a member of the family. No, she's not. She's your employee. And just like if you employ somebody at your workplace, you need to know what the rules are. You need to know what minimum wage is. You need to know about OSHA protections. You need to know about all of the laws. There are laws that protect domestic workers in the city. So educate yourself about what those rights are. They're on our website. You can do a Google of National Domestic Workers Alliance or of the Philadelphia Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. Sit down and negotiate that contract with your domestic worker and really understand that this isn't the help. This isn't a member of the family. This is an employee who you have paid to take care of the most important things and people in your life. And you should treat that person not just on the law, but with the dignity that they deserve. What do you think?
Yeah. Of course, just like you said, Nicole, a lot of the times is that workers do not always do the research pertaining, like, all right, so because the history of the work that, domestic workers do, I would say myself recently, as of a month ago, I was a nanny. Now I work with NDW. But so people like to get or put it where, oh, well, I didn't know. But you're supposed to know, because for any other job, you do the research before you hire. You know what I'm saying? So just give it the same respect like any other job. Our job, we heard it's essential when it was the pandemic. We got a little value there, but do the work, put in the work to show us that you value us. And there are many ways to do that. Negotiate, bring about a fair contract to the table, pay us the overtime that is due.
I mean,
Okay.
and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's a great question too, just to say that the union members of the city were forced back to work of, Ask Me DC 47, and they went to court saying, hey, this mayor is anti-union, forcing us back. So another way to be in solidarity is to have your union and your organizations support this campaign, because this isn't just about domestic workers. This is about making Philadelphia truly a city that works for workers, whether they work in City Hall or whether they work in the homes of people who work in City Hall. That solidarity is required, because obviously it doesn't just stop here. This is about having a city that deeply centers labor justice, regardless of where that person works.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to come and talk to us. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, my co-host, and you are still listening to Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Before we let you go, where can people find out more about the Domestic Workers Alliance?
So they can just go online and look up the National Domestic Workers Alliance. If you want to get involved with the Pennsylvania chapter, just put in Pennsylvania chapter after that. The city's Department of Labor also provides a lot more resources for both workers and employers around how to negotiate your contract. There's contract templates there. There's what the rights are there. There's really no reason why folks with internet can't learn about those rights.
All right. Adriana George and Nicole Kligerman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. We'd like to thank the Domestic Workers Alliance for joining us on the show tonight. And they're going to be back with us as well as new legislation comes up. And we want to keep on top of this fight to make sure there are enough people for everybody in the city. If they have a complaint about working conditions, something like that, they can go and take care of that and have somebody to talk to. You know, when you're talking about one city representative for every 200,000 people in the city, that's just not good enough. And we know that people are exploited. We know that people aren't getting paid what they should be paid. We know that people are working in conditions that are not amenable. So these things need to be handled. And this is something we're going to be keeping an eye on in the fall as City Council comes back. Now I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray.
Hi.
Denise, tell everybody where you are right now.
Right now, I am at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Chicago, Illinois, which is also going to be the site of the Democratic National Convention I think in 2 weeks here in Chicago.
So, Denise, you're at the NABJ convention, and there's a little bit of news coming out of there from earlier today.
Yeah. Every year, the NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists, invites the presidential candidates or elected leaders to come and talk to our members about, because we try to have newsmakers as part of the conference. This year's newsmaker was former President Donald Trump, who came and did a talk with 3 journalists, one from ABC News, one from a website called Semaphore, and another from Fox News, Harris Faulkner. That's the only one I could remember right now. The ABC News anchor is April Lindsay, and I'll get the lady from Semaphore for you in a second. But he came, and it was I know that you go to the zoo a lot, Larry. So you have probably seen the monkey house. Mm-hmm. And you've seen what monkeys do in the monkey house. Monkeys tend to throw poop in the monkey house. And because of that, you wouldn't necessarily bring a monkey to your house. That was how a lot of people viewed Donald Trump's appearance at NABJ.
Yeah.
Like, you knew what you were going to get, and you brought it anyway. And the thing
somehow it went even worse than I thought it was going to go. But
yeah, it was not pretty. First of all, it started late. It started an hour and a half late. He said because of technical difficulties, and while technical difficulties might have played a part in it, so was the desire for real-time fact-checking. Apparently, he thought he could come into a journalist organization and negotiate fact-checking, which in a way, I guess he kind of did, because I didn't see any real-time fact-checking, but it was hard to miss the things that were inaccurate in the whole thing. And probably the thing that he said that kind of stuck out the most here was he was talking about Vice President and presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris and her heritage. She is African, she is Black, and she is Indian. Her mom was Indian, her father was Black. And despite having graduated from one of the premier HBCUs, historically Black colleges in the country, and being a member of the oldest Black sorority in the country, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Trump said basically that she was just now claiming to be Black and that she had been Indian the rest of the time. Now, no one can find anywhere where she has delineated herself one way, a majority one way or the other her entire career. She has talked about both her Black and Asian heritage. But that's what he said in front of millions of people today.
And, you would think that somebody would learn, and I think I've overestimated him by saying that. But this is the same kind of nonsense he was saying about Barack Obama
Yes.
in a lot of ways.
Well, if the hits keep playing, you're going to continue to play them, right? I mean, if you with him, it's very much if it ain't broke, don't fix it when it comes to this kind of thing. But it was just what I found most interesting was some of the crowd reaction to this. You had some people that actually booed, and you wouldn't expect a room full of journalists to boo, because let's face it, that's not our mandate. Our mandate is to play it down the middle, to tell you all the sides of a story. So
we don't even, to give people an example, Denise, when you and I are in council, we barely react to anything.
And
we don't clap.
Council gives us a lot to react to.
And we don't.
Right. So it was kind of unprecedented that you had people who booed. It was kind of unprecedented that you had people that were doing their own live fact checking in the event. And it was also kind of unprecedented that you had somebody that I don't think he answered one question. He talked over, like the anchor from ABC, April Lindsay. He basically talked over her and called her rude the entire time because she was asking him questions about his connection to white supremacist groups. And these were questions he didn't want to answer. So he basically tried to steamroll her, pretty much like he, tried to steamroll President Biden during their June 27th debate. And I understand why the invitation was made. Every year, NABJ invites all the candidates and all the elected officials and stuff to come and talk, the newsmakers. I understand why the invitation was, extended. And journalistically, on a purely journalistic standpoint, it made sense because we were doing our job as journalists, bringing a newsmaker in and asking him questions, or at least attempting to ask the tough questions. But from an informational standpoint, it didn't do a whole lot. And for a standpoint for some of our members, it did even less. For example, the magazine Black Enterprise was supposed to do a workshop as part of NABJ. They canceled because of this.
Yeah.
There were several other people who did workshops, who were scheduled to do workshops that canceled because of this. You have people I even got a call from one of the people who's going to be on the panel that you and I are doing here at NABJ on Saturday, asking was the panel still going on, because she had heard that all of these people were canceling. And I was like, yeah, the panel is still going on. But the thing is, you can't blame people for saying, okay, you kind of maybe went a little bit off the grid here, especially when you also had people who were journalists of the year for the organization, like April Ryan from the Griot, who was denouncing this. You had one of the co-chairs of the convention itself, Karen Attia of the Washington Post, who was also an NABJ award winner, stepped down as co-chair of the event, because when this was announced on Monday, none of the co-chairs was alerted to it.
Right. So we're going to have
no one knew it was coming.
Right. We're going to have to leave it there, Denise. We're going to talk more about this next week on the show and talk about our panel. Next week, Marissa Waxman will be on the program. So we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.